Narrator. Laura understood what it meant to be heartbroken at that moment. 3 years of devoted love and 2 years of inseparable bond had now left her with nothing but bleeding wounds. Her heart shattered along with the unborn child that had perished before it could even form.
If that's the case, I wish you a happy new marriage.
Hot tears streamed down her cheeks, the salty taste gathering on her tongue. It felt like a steel knife was twisting inside her stomach. Unable to support her body any longer, Laura's eyes closed, and she collapsed to the ground. In her haze, she heard a familiar voice calling her name desperately. But before she could respond, her consciousness plunged into darkness.
Laura! Laura!
Amidst the cruel flashes of cameras, Ethan's body tensed, his heart clenching painfully. He instinctively wanted to move forward but was stopped by Khloe, who was tightly holding onto his arm.
Young Master Ethan is here. Can you explain your relationship with your sister-in-law, Ethan?
Fearless reporters swarmed forward, their microphones almost poking into Aaron's face.
Get out of the way!
Aaron roared, grabbing a nearby camera and smashing it to the ground with a loud crash. The shattered pieces landed at Ethan's feet as the two equally striking men faced off, tension crackling between them.
Ethan, can you act like a man and stop using underhanded tactics?
The meaning behind Aaron's words was unclear, whether he was referring to Laura's miscarriage or the affair that Ethan had discovered. Aaron scooped Laura up from the ground, his hand feeling the slick warmth of her blood. His eyes were filled with a mix of deep sorrow and seething hatred towards Ethan.
I will make you pay for this.
Without lingering any longer, Aaron hurriedly carried Laura to the hospital, ending the chaotic scene. The wedding was undoubtedly ruined. A large number of bodyguards rushed in, dispersing the reporters and escorting Ethan and Khloe away. It was certain that tomorrow's headlines would spread today's events far and wide. Ethan's fist slammed onto the steering wheel, the veins on his forehead bulging menacingly. In just a few days, his life had turned upside down. The surprise he had planned for Laura by returning home overnight had turned into a nightmare. If it weren't for this unexpected turn of events, Ethan might never have known the ugly truth behind his marriage. Even Laura's face in his mind was now distorted and blurred by anger.
I'm sorry for dragging you into this.
A warm hand suddenly rested on his tense shoulder, offering comfort. Ethan turned to look at Khloe, his first love who had just returned to the country and donned a wedding dress. His eyes were filled with guilt.
I know you're hurting inside. Trust me, everything will pass.
Her fingers lightly touched his pale face, her smile unwavering, hiding the fleeting calculation in her eyes. The beeping of the machines echoed in her ears as Laura opened her bleary eyes to the stark white of the hospital room. Thunder rumbled ominously in the distance outside the gloomy window. Memories of fainting surged back into Laura's mind like a flood, overwhelming her heartbeat and breath. Tears streamed down her pale face as she tried to sit up, but the door to the room suddenly opened. Aaron paused with his hand on the door, his expression coming to life when he saw Laura awake.
You're awake. How are you feeling? Is there any discomfort? Are you hungry?
He rushed over, pressing his palm to Laura's forehead, openly showing his concern. Laura awkwardly turned her head to avoid the warmth of his touch, her eyes flickering. Despite being married to Ethan for 2 years, she and Aaron had maintained a proper distance, and this sudden closeness made her extremely uncomfortable. Aaron stiffened, slowly withdrawing his hand and burying his sorrow deep within. He turned to pour Laura a glass of water and handed it to her.
Sit up and have some water.
Laura stared blankly at the glass, her eyes empty as if she saw something terrifying through it. Suddenly, she sat up abruptly, knocking Aaron's hand away, and the glass shattered on the floor with a crisp sound.
No. I don't want to drink it. Don't harm my baby. No.
It was after drinking a similar glass of water yesterday that she had lost her child. Tears of despair welled up in Laura's eyes. From the intimacy of a married couple to the current estrangement, an insurmountable chasm had grown between Laura and Ethan. Fate's cruel twists seemed to come without warning. The blinding flashes made Laura's eyes sting, and she wished she could just faint. But the sharp pain in her abdomen and the rapid thumping of her heart reminded her that pain wouldn't disappear just because she wanted to escape. Even now, Laura couldn't understand why she woke up to find herself in bed with Aaron.
Flashback to the night before.
One moment, she was on the phone with Ethan, who was on a business trip in the US, sharing the news of her pregnancy. The next, she was being dragged out of bed by her husband, slapped awake. In just one day, her 2-year marriage with Ethan had turned to ashes.
No matter how I explain, you won't believe me, will you?
Facing the scorn of the world was nothing. She only wanted his trust.
I only believe what I see.
On the day Laura was discharged from the hospital, no one came to pick her up. She looked at the bustling street, and a wave of sadness washed over her. Suddenly, a dark-colored sedan stopped in front of her, and a young man in a sharp suit stepped out of the car.
Liam!
Laura recognized Ethan's personal assistant, Liam, and a sense of foreboding crept over her. The next second, Liam pulled out a check from behind him and held it in front of Laura.
This is a check for $1 million. Mr. Ethan hopes you will leave this city and never appear in front of him again.
Ethan, how could you use money to humiliate me?
The dark-tinted car windows effectively blocked the view from outside, but Laura instinctively knew Ethan was inside. She suddenly rushed forward and started pounding on the window with her fists.
I didn't betray you. I love you so much. How can you do this to me?
The sound of her fists hitting the car echoed in the narrow space, pressing against one's eardrums. Ethan sat in the back seat, his face ashen. With a slight turn of his head, he could see Laura's tear-streaked, heartbroken face.
I don't love you anymore.
Laura heard Ethan say this, his tone calm as if he were stating the most ordinary fact. But it was precisely these 5 words that shattered the last armor Laura had been desperately holding on to, leaving her utterly defeated.
Not in love anymore.
She collapsed to the ground in despair, looking like a dazed vagrant on the street. The swiftness of broken promises mirrored the intensity of Laura's pain. It wasn't until Liam impatiently pushed her shoulder that she snapped back to reality. Suddenly, she grabbed the check from Liam's hand and tore it into tiny pieces, scattering them into the car.
I don't want your money, and I won't leave. Ethan, just wait. I will find out the truth.
The paper fragments, light as snowflakes, fell all over Ethan. Hearing Laura's words, a shadow flickered in his eyes. How stubborn could she be, still refusing to give up even at this point? Like a condemned prisoner proclaiming innocence at the last moment, in Ethan's eyes, Laura had already been sentenced. There was no time to waste here. He gave Liam a look.
Sorry, Laura.
Liam nodded, suddenly pulling out a handkerchief from his pocket and covering Laura's mouth and nose. Laura struggled for a few seconds, a painful whimper escaping her throat, but before she could regain her footing, the strong smell of ether took away her consciousness. The car door opened just in time, and Ethan caught the collapsing woman, his face serious. No matter what, Laura had to leave. When Laura woke up again, she found herself on a train. The narrow berth smelled musty, and the odor made her nauseous with just one deep breath. It seemed to be nearing nightfall. After asking other passengers, she learned that this was a train heading to Yun City.
My hometown.
Yun City was her hometown, nestled on the edge of an endless prairie. She hadn't seen her aging parents in years, feeling a pang of guilt for forgetting her roots after marrying into a wealthy family. The thought of not having told her parents about what happened with Ethan made her heart ache. Lying on the pillow, tears uncontrollably streamed down her face, soaking the not-so-clean fabric.
No, I have to find the truth and clear my name. I am not a promiscuous woman. Someone must have orchestrated all this behind the scenes.
Laura never thought she would be back on a train to a city so soon. After sitting on the prairie for a day and a night, she decided to return to a city to seek the truth. She owed it to herself and to her parents. After some time, the once sensational news had been replaced by new headlines. When Laura looked at the newspapers and magazines on the streets, words like Ye family, affair, and divorce had completely disappeared. Ethan must have ensured that the family's scandal didn't spread.
I have nothing left.
Laura was still empty-handed, with only a small suitcase. Even her clothes were dusty. The check Ethan had put back in her pocket had been torn to pieces and thrown onto the desolate tracks. As the familiar, glamorous city reappeared in her sight, Laura felt a mix of emotions. Without the Ye family's protection, she was penniless. She rummaged through her bag and suddenly saw the diamond ring on her hand.
Laura, will you marry me?
The scene of Ethan proposing with the ring was still vivid, but now everything had changed. The autumn wind didn't give Laura much time to think. She took a deep breath and walked into the darkness behind the neon lights. In the following days, Laura sold the ring and used the $10,000 she got to rent a small apartment, solving her housing problem. Curled up on the bed, she cried silently, the cold atmosphere of the room piercing deep into her heart. In a delicate little villa, the environment was very quiet, with the moon hanging high, casting its cold light through the window. Ethan almost fell off the sofa as he turned over. He shook his groggy head and saw the empty wine bottles scattered on the floor, letting out a bitter smile.
Drunk again.
He staggered to turn on the light, revealing the mess in the living room, with the strong smell of alcohol permeating every corner. The man, with his unshaven face and disheveled hair, looked worlds apart from his usual self. The dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept well in a long time. Ethan opened his bloodshot eyes and began to clean up the wine bottles one by one.
Since Laura left, this house full of memories has become my most painful place.
No matter how much he warned himself not to come back, he couldn't control his subconscious steps. Ethan sighed, looking at the overturned photo frame on the coffee table, his heart full of bitterness.
Why do you still think of her? She's not worth it.
He told himself. Dragging his heavy body, Ethan walked into the bathroom, letting the cold water cascade over his face. After cleaning himself up, he stood by the bedroom window, looking at the wedding ring still on his hand. Suddenly, he took it off and threw it out the window with all his might. The small circle quickly disappeared, leaving no trace behind.
Letting go is liberation.
Just as Ethan was about to go to bed, he heard a faint noise coming from the living room downstairs. Curious, he quietly opened the door and walked towards the staircase. Laura tentatively placed her hand on the fingerprint lock, and to her surprise, the door opened. Seeing the familiar home, she couldn't help but feel a pang of bitterness.
Not long ago, I was the mistress of this house. Now, I'm sneaking around like a thief. But to find the truth, I have to be here.
She didn't see Ethan's car outside, so she assumed he no longer lived here. Laura remembered the cameras in the living room. If she could find the surveillance footage from that day, she might understand why she ended up in bed with Aaron.
I remember it was in this drawer.
Just as Laura was scratching her head in confusion, the lights suddenly turned on with a click. The blinding light made her dizzy, and when she turned around, she saw Ethan's shocked face.
What are you doing here? Didn't I send you away?
I'm a living person. You have no right to control me.
Seeing Ethan's reaction after so long made Laura's heart ache. Did he really not want to see her that much? Thinking of her parents' tragic end and the license plate number Anu had told her, Laura's eyes filled with pain as she looked at him.
Don't worry, I won't bother you anymore.
Ethan's gaze darkened terrifyingly when he noticed Laura's empty fingers.
Won't bother me? Then why are you in my house? To see the bed where you and another man had your fun?
You still don't believe me.
She suddenly remembered her purpose for sneaking into Ethan's house at night, the surveillance footage.
Did you watch the footage from that day? You must not have. If you did, you'd know I was framed.
Laura anxiously stretched her neck towards Ethan, instinctively reaching out to grab his arm, but he forcefully pushed her away. The anger in Ethan's eyes grew more intense, and he suddenly let out a cold laugh.
Fine. You want to see it? I'll show you.
He violently grabbed Laura's arm and marched towards the study upstairs. Laura's arm hurt from being pulled, but she didn't make a sound. The study door was flung open, and Ethan threw Laura inside. The frail woman was tossed far and landed on the ground with a dull thud, tears streaming down her face from the pain. She never thought Ethan would treat her like this one day, so roughly, as if he were a different person from the husband she had loved for 2 years. Ethan quickly walked to the desk, opened his laptop, and his fingers clattered on the keyboard. Within a minute, he had pulled up the footage he wanted.
Look! See for yourself.
He turned the screen towards Laura, and before she could react, he yanked her up from the floor and pressed her head in front of the laptop. The overwhelming sense of humiliation made Laura want to run away, but reason told her she needed to see this through to the end. The surveillance footage on the screen was clear, with the timestamp showing the exact night. Laura saw herself in a flimsy nightgown, heading upstairs without turning off the lights. 10 minutes later, Aaron stumbled in, looking heavily intoxicated, calling out Laura's name instead of sister-in-law.
This can't be happening.
She continued watching, unaware of Ethan's increasingly grim expression behind her.
Laura. Laura.
Aaron wobbled up the stairs and disappeared at Laura's bedroom door. The more she watched, the paler Laura's face became. She had never hated her habit of not locking the door more than at that moment. The next second, a more devastating sound came from the half-open room.
No! Impossible!
She collapsed to the ground, eyes wide, vehemently denying everything she saw because she had no memory of it.
Do you have anything else to say now?
He had confirmed the video countless times until he was utterly convinced of Laura's betrayal. No matter how she tried to clear her name, to Ethan, it was all just an act.
Ethan. I didn't do anything with Aaron. Look, there are no marks on my body.
She babbled in fear, terrified that Ethan had labeled her as unfaithful.
I really didn't. I don't know what happened with this video.
Since you have no shame, I'll make sure you never see another man again.
With that, he knocked Laura unconscious. In the dim basement of Ethan's mansion, a woman lay on the ground, barely alive. If not for the faint rise and fall of her chest, one might think she was a lifeless body.
Ethan.
Laura moved her weak body slightly, her consciousness gradually returning. She struggled to lift her head, looking at Ethan's towering figure with infinite sorrow in her eyes.
Ethan, please!
She closed her eyes in despair, unable to bear the sight of Ethan's cold back. She never thought she would end up back where she was 3 years ago. Meanwhile, Ethan returned to the living room and immediately noticed Khloe sitting on the sofa, waiting.
Ethan, what were you doing downstairs?
How did you know I came from downstairs?
His probing gaze seemed to search for hidden secrets in Khloe's eyes. She panicked for a moment but quickly masked it.
What's wrong? The maid told me.
She pretended to adjust her clothes, avoiding Ethan's piercing stare. When she looked up again, her face was calm.
Nothing, just went to get something.
He spoke lightly, but Khloe couldn't remain calm. She quickly found an excuse and left the house in a hurry. As her car sped down the street, an inexplicable sense of unease gnawed at her. At a red light, she couldn't resist pulling out her phone and dialing a number.
Meet me at my place in 20 minutes.
When the appointed time arrived, Khloe rushed in, barely catching her breath before a tall figure pinned her against the wall. The eager man showered kisses on her pale skin, his hands wandering under her clothes, only to be shoved away by Khloe the next second.
Jack! Show some respect!
She snapped, glaring at the nonchalant man before her, wishing she could slap him. But she couldn't, she still needed his help.
What's so urgent that you had to call me? What could make the great Khloe so flustered?
Khloe looked at Jack with displeasure as he made himself at home, but she still sat down indignantly.
Khloe, tone, worried Ethan seems to be getting suspicious of me.
Jack, tone, mocking you're overthinking it. Our plan is so meticulous, how could Ethan find out? He's not the same big boss he used to be.
His words carried a hint of disdain, as if he didn't take Ethan seriously at all. But Khloe thought differently.
Khloe, tone, serious no, we must get rid of Laura immediately.
She made up her mind with a cold, venomous look in her eyes.
Jack, tone, wicked don't worry, I'm here. Don't forget, Laura is still under my hypnotic suggestion.
Khloe, who was about to struggle, gave up when she heard this, letting Jack's actions become more and more inappropriate. She never felt that using her body to get what she wanted was a shameful act. Narrator, tone, serious. Khloe had long suspected that Laura was being kept in the basement by Ethan, but seeing her in such a pitiful state still caught her off guard.
Khloe, tone, mocking TSK, 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 seeing you like this almost makes me feel bad for you.
Narrator, tone, serious. She squatted down, her eyes full of mockery. Laura merely glanced up at her before letting her head drop again, too exhausted to deal with Khloe's presence.
Khloe, tone, mocking. Aren't you curious why you're in this situation?
Laura, tone, disbelief. What do you mean?
Narrator, tone, serious. Her voice, and used for so long, sounded hoarse, like that of an elderly person nearing the end of life. A strong sense of unease gripped her, as if a heavy stone was pressing on her chest.
Khloe, tone, serious. Since you're about to disappear from this world forever, I'll be kind enough to tell you. Actually, I orchestrated all of this. Remember that recording? I made it on purpose, playing it outside your door the night Aaron got drunk to create the illusion of you two being intimate. Even the medicine that caused you to lose the baby was given by me through Aunt Ing.
Narrator, tone, serious. The brutal truth of the past was laid bare, hitting Laura hard. She stared blankly at Khloe's moving lips, her mind buzzing.
Laura, tone, disbelief, why?
Narrator, tone, serious, she murmured, her voice full of shock. If Khloe hadn't said it herself, Laura would never have believed that the person who harmed her was Khloe. Khloe had always seemed so gentle and kind. Why would she go to such lengths to hurt her?
Khloe, tone, angry, why? Because you took the man I love. I, Khloe, can't stand to see my things taken away. I had to ruin you completely.
Narrator, tone, serious. Laura's heart was numb with pain. Just for this? Khloe had overestimated her.
Laura, tone, resigned, you're wrong. Ethan was never mine. You should know by now, seeing me like this, that he never loved me.
Narrator, tone, serious. Laura was unaware of Ethan's memory loss, thinking only that her years of devoted love had been a joke. No one would treat someone they loved this way.
Laura, tone, sad, thank you for telling me.
Narrator, tone, serious. Khloe was taken aback, then laughed knowingly.
Khloe, tone, triumphant, let me send you on your way.
Narrator, tone, serious. She pulled a small paper packet from her bag, revealing a white pill inside. Jack had given her this pill. Just one small dose would be enough to end Laura's life.
Khloe, tone, triumphant, I thought I'd have to force you. Since you're so cooperative, here, take this, and you'll be free.
Narrator, tone, serious. She extended her hand towards Laura, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. Laura took the pill from her hand and suddenly burst into hysterical laughter, with murky tears streaming down her face.
Ha ha ha. If Ethan knew the truth, would he regret letting go?
She desperately brought the pill to her mouth, but just as she was about to swallow it, applause suddenly echoed from outside the basement door. Khloe looked up sharply, her pupils contracting as she stared at the door, a sudden intense unease gripping her heart. Sure enough, the next second Ethan and Aaron's faces appeared through the open door.
Ethan, weren't you at the ancestral hall?
She took a step towards Ethan but froze under his cold gaze.
Laura! Are you all right?
Aaron rushed in, crouched beside Laura, and half lifted her, unable to say a word as he looked at her miserable state, his heart aching with every beat.
You really surprised me, Khloe.
The last two words were spat out through gritted teeth, his eyes filled with a fury that seemed ready to tear Khloe apart.
How much did you hear?
Everything.
He answered Khloe's question indifferently, his heart tightening as he saw Laura's focused gaze.
Not only that, I also know Laura was subjected to psychological suggestion. That psychologist was your person, wasn't it?
How do you know?
Did you forget? I studied psychological hypnosis in college.
Hearing this, Khloe finally understood where she had slipped up, her eyes filled with despair.
So that's it, ha ha ha.
Suddenly, Aaron's terrified voice rang out.
She's passed out!
He lifted the frail woman in his arms and, ignoring the chaos inside, ran out. Ethan's heart clenched, and he ordered his men to take Khloe away before following Aaron. Even in the empty living room, Khloe's hysterical laughter echoed, creating an eerie atmosphere.
Ethan, have you regained your memory?
Ethan paused but didn't answer her question. Instead, he turned and slapped Khloe hard across the face. It was all because of this woman that he and Laura had ended up like this. A single slap couldn't quell the hatred in his heart. Khloe turned her head to the side, her delicate face swelling instantly. She couldn't believe that the man who had been so close to her yesterday was now glaring at her with red eyes and had even struck her. Her lips trembled uncontrollably.
You actually hit me?
Ethan sneered, clearly showing that Khloe still didn't realize her situation and was unwilling to let go of her ridiculous pride to beg for mercy.
I must have been blind to be with a woman as heartless as you.
Thinking about the times Laura had been nearly driven to despair by Khloe's schemes, Ethan couldn't control his rage. He slapped Khloe again, and seeing the trace of blood at the corner of her mouth, a flicker of satisfaction crossed his eyes. Having such a dangerous person close to him, Ethan's feelings were beyond panic. He had almost lost Laura. The thought of it filled him with dread.
Yes! I'm heartless. But don't forget, even though I planned all this, it was you who turned Laura into what she is now.
Her words pierced Ethan's heart like a sharp knife, making him stagger back a few steps, his eyes filled with unending sorrow. She was right, from beginning to end, the person who hurt Laura the most was him.
Ha ha ha.
Just as the tension reached its peak, a sudden noise came from outside the door. Ethan frowned, deeply on guard. With a loud bang, something was thrown in from outside the window. Seeing a golf ball-sized object at his feet, which suddenly started emitting thick smoke, Ethan muttered.
Damn it!
The smoke quickly spread, filling the room with a dense white fog that completely obscured everyone's vision. Before anyone could react, they felt an unfamiliar presence in the room, followed by the guards' screams. The scene turned chaotic, with sounds of fighting and furniture being knocked over. When someone finally reached the door and flung it open, the chaos began to subside. A few minutes later, as the smoke cleared, the guards lay on the ground, groaning, each clutching their necks where blood was seeping from needle-like wounds. Ethan's face was terrifyingly grim because he realized Khloe was gone. The short rescue operation had been executed flawlessly.
Find her immediately. Bring her back.
The guards scrambled to their feet, hastily obeying as they supported each other out of the room. The living room was filled with the pungent smell of gunpowder, creating an eerie atmosphere. Ethan suppressed his growing unease and started walking upstairs, but hesitated at the closed door. Laura lay inside, and Ethan couldn't even muster the courage to face her. After everything that had happened, all the complex and bizarre mysteries were unraveled with Khloe's exposure. Laura had not been unfaithful with Aaron, which was good news for Ethan, but he couldn't feel any relief. As Khloe had said, although all the misunderstandings were her doing, the scars on Laura's body and soul were already there. Their child was gone, their marriage broken. Ultimately, it was all because of his lack of trust. After hesitating for a long time, Ethan finally chose to push the door open. Aaron, hearing the noise at the door, hurriedly let go of Laura's hand, a look of embarrassment in his eyes as he glanced at Ethan.
How is she?
The shock was too much, she fainted. Combined with malnutrition, the doctor is preparing in for.
Just then, the private doctor came in, pushing a small medical cart. He glanced at the two brothers without a word and slowly moved to Laura's bedside. He took Laura's emaciated wrist, his hand trembling slightly with the needle. The woman before him had once been the beloved Mrs. Ethan, young, beautiful, and radiant like a rose. Now, she was gaunt, with sunken eyes and cracked lips, barely recognizable as the Laura from a few years ago. The doctor sighed inwardly and gently inserted the needle into the vein on the back of Laura's hand. The slight sting made Laura's body twitch, but she didn't wake up. After finishing, the doctor quietly left, leaving the two brothers by the bedside.
Aaron, do you think Laura will want to see me when she wakes up?
If it weren't for you regaining your memory in time to set a trap for Khloe, Things could have been much worse. The misunderstandings are cleared up. Laura will understand.
He smiled at Ethan, though his heart felt heavy. After all this time, Aaron had long since come to terms with it. The lesson that love cannot be forced was clear to him from the moment Ethan risked his life to save Laura 3 years ago. Though there was still some regret in his heart, it was better to see the two people he loved most be happy together than to remain in an awkward stalemate. Ethan looked at his brother, who was trying to help him find peace, and shook his head helplessly. Laura will understand, she will. But why couldn't he have shown Laura more understanding back then? No matter how much Aaron tried to comfort him, it couldn't calm Ethan's restless heart. Unnoticed, the 4-bag had emptied. Ethan instructed the servants to prepare some light food and water, which were brought to the bedside. Everyone anxiously surrounded Laura, hoping she would recover soon. Amid the sweet aroma of rice porridge, Laura slowly opened her eyes. She moved her aching body. Unlike the cold, damp, hard floor of the basement, the soft and comfortable touch beneath her made Laura pause. Before she could take in her surroundings, Aaron anxiously leaned over to check on her.
Laura, are you okay?
For a long moment, Laura couldn't snap out of her daze until she saw Ethan standing on the other side of the bed. Instantly, memories from not long ago flooded her mind like a torrent, and the overwhelming truths echoed in her ears like a relentless drumbeat. She stared blankly, her eyes suddenly filling with tears. Her lips moved, but no sound came out.
Laura.
Seeing this, Aaron sensibly led everyone out of the room, giving the two enough space.
Don't call me.
Laura turned her head away in anger, tears streaming down her face. She couldn't convince herself, nor could she find a reason to easily forgive Ethan, let alone accept these shattered truths with an open heart.
I once said, you would regret it.
Their relationship was like a wooden board riddled with holes. Even if you pulled out all the nails, the scars would never disappear. A broken mirror can't be mended, and spilled water can't be gathered up again, simple truths. Ethan's heart shattered into countless pieces at that moment, fully realizing his regret. Looking at Laura's suddenly cold face, a premonition that he was about to lose the most important thing in his life gripped Ethan's heart, making him feel suffocated. He frantically reached out and pulled her into his arms. Holding her frail body, Ethan's heart ached even more.
Laura, I'm sorry, truly sorry. It's all my fault. Please don't be like this.
3 years later, their roles had completely reversed. Ethan now felt the heart-wrenching pain Laura had once endured, and his heart grew heavier.
Don't you understand? We can't go back.
Laura cried out, her fists pounding on Ethan's broad back before finally falling weakly to her sides.
No. Laura, you still love me, don't you? Let's forget the past and start over, okay? Please? I can't live without you.
His heartfelt confession didn't move Laura. She let out a bitter laugh, her resolute words as light as a feather yet as heavy as a mountain.
Ethan, you've long exhausted all the love I had for you. Please, let us both go.
An overwhelming fatigue grew in Laura's heart, as if saying she no longer had the courage to love again in this lifetime. Suddenly, the burning sensation on the back of her neck made her body stiffen, and the intense sorrow between them spread. Ethan was crying. Laura bit her lip, ignoring her own trembling heart.
I want to leave here.
Ethan's body stiffened, and his heart skipped a beat. His eyes reddened as he released his grip.
I just remembered something important. You should rest, we'll talk later.
Afraid of hearing another farewell from Laura, he instinctively wanted to escape. He stood up, ready to rush out the door.
We have nothing more to talk about.
Laura threw off the covers and tried to get out of bed, but her legs were weak. As soon as her feet touched the ground, she felt a strong dizziness. It took all her strength not to collapse as she slowly walked towards Ethan. Passing by Ethan, Laura opened the door and immediately saw Aaron leaning against the wall. Aaron awkwardly shifted his numb feet, his face serious, clearly having heard the commotion inside.
Laura, my brother.
Seeing Laura's indifferent face, he stopped mid-sentence. Ignoring the brother's varied expressions, Laura slowly approached the staircase. Ethan walked out of the room in despair, watching her thin back, wanting to speak but unable to find the words. Laura never looked back, saying a faint goodbye before stepping downstairs, her vision blurred by tears.
The next moment, a severe dizziness overtook her, and before she could steady herself on the steps, she lost control and fell down the stairs.
Laura.
Both brothers screamed in terror, their pupils contracting at the sight. Aaron felt a gust of wind pass by, and the next second, he saw Ethan sprinting towards Laura.
In a split second, Ethan grabbed Laura's arm, pulling her into his embrace as they both tumbled down the stairs. The dull thuds of their bodies colliding echoed, and within seconds, Ethan's face turned pale with pain.
However, Laura was tightly protected in his strong arms, barely feeling the impact. Hearing the constant groans above her, Laura's heart twisted painfully.
Ethan!
Brother!
Even as they reached the flat ground at the bottom of the stairs, Ethan maintained a protective posture over Laura, his cheekbones and forehead bruised. Laura lay on top of him, unable to check Ethan's injuries as a sharp pain in her lower abdomen took her breath away.
My stomach, it hurts!
It felt like something was slipping away from her body, a feeling Laura knew all too well. She cried out in despair, a strong metallic scent filling the air behind her.
No. Ethan. Help me.
Ethan, holding Laura, sat up and saw the large red stain spreading from between her legs, staining his pants and the floor.
Laura! Laura! What's happening?
A wave of fear engulfed Ethan as he desperately called for a doctor. The doctor rushed over, shocked by the scene.
Quick! To the hospital. Miss Laura seems to be having a complication.
The words struck like thunder, leaving everyone stunned. Laura couldn't bear the pain any longer and fainted. Ethan recalled that night at the hotel over a month ago, his eyes filled with even more sorrow. Were both of their children destined never to see the world? The blinding flashes made Laura's eyes sting, and she wished she could just faint. But the sharp pain in her abdomen and the rapid thumping of her heart reminded her that pain wouldn't disappear just because she wanted to escape. Even now, Laura couldn't understand why she woke up to find herself in bed with Aaron.
One moment, I was on the phone with Ethan, sharing the news of my pregnancy. The next, I was being dragged out of bed by my husband, slapped awake.
In just one day, her 2-year marriage with Ethan had turned to ashes. Laura, holding on to her pride, looked Ethan in the eye and asked a crucial question.
No matter how I explain, you won't believe me, will you?
Facing the scorn of the world was nothing, she only wanted his trust. Ethan's cold sneer made his stance clear.
I only believe what I see.
Laura's eyes stung from the blinding flashes, and she wished she could just pass out. In pain, why is this happening to me?
The sharp pain in her abdomen and the rapid thumping of her heart reminded her that pain wouldn't disappear just because she wanted to escape.
How did I end up in bed with Aaron?
One moment, she was on the phone with Ethan, who was on a business trip in the US, sharing the news of her pregnancy. The next, she was being dragged out of bed by her husband, slapped awake.
Ethan, why don't you believe me?
I only believe what I see.
In just one day, her 2-year marriage with Ethan had turned to ashes. Laura touched her lower abdomen, and suddenly, her mood lightened. But she was still hesitant about whether to forgive Ethan. Just then, the door to the hospital room gently opened, and Ethan's bruised face peeked through the gap.
Why are you crying? Are you feeling unwell?
Laura stared at him, momentarily unable to process the drastic turn of events. Ethan, too emotional, accidentally tugged at his facial wounds, causing his muscles to twitch in pain, yet he continued to gently wipe Laura's tears. Seeing the focused look in his eyes, Laura felt a sudden shyness, her cheeks flushing red.
Aaron, why are you laughing?
But the good news was that Laura's attitude towards Ethan was no longer as resistant as before. He stood up nervously, looking at Laura with hopeful eyes.
Laura, will you forgive me?
Ethan had never shown such a humble demeanor before, making Aaron shake his head and quietly leave, not wanting to be the third wheel. People always hope for a happy ending. Aaron felt a fleeting sense of loneliness but smiled with relief when he saw Ethan and Laura's mutual gaze through the door gap. Now, it was just the two of them in the room. Ethan, feeling a bit awkward, tentatively reached for Laura's hand resting on the bedside.
Honey.
Who are you calling honey? Have you forgotten how you forced me to sign the divorce papers?
Ethan panicked immediately. The once dominant business tycoon now looked like a naive young boy. Before Laura could react, he dropped to one knee with a thud.
Laura, marry me again.
A month later, the grand wedding that had been the talk of a city for half a month was finally taking place. The church had only a few guests seated on either side, but the wedding setup was truly breathtaking.
I thought since we had already been married once, there was no need for such a grand affair.
As she stepped onto the red carpet leading to the altar in her pure white gown, she was stunned by the sea of white roses around her.
White roses symbolize a willingness to give everything for someone. The elegant and sacred church, the statues, the reliefs, and the colorful stained glass windows all conveyed the solemnity of this wedding.
At that moment, Laura suddenly understood why so many women yearned for a church wedding all their lives. She touched her pounding heart and looked up at Ethan, who was smiling at her from the front, feeling overwhelmed by the ceremony's gravity.
Sis, come on.
Aaron smiled as he stood beside her, offering his arm, his eyes full of blessings and hopes for Laura. Laura smiled back, took his arm, and slowly walked towards Ethan to the tune of the wedding march, moving towards the man who had entangled her life.
Groom, do you take this woman to be your wife, to live together in marriage, to love her, comfort her, honor and keep her, in sickness and in health, in sorrow and in joy, so long as you both shall live?
The priest's deep, melodious voice echoed, holding the heavy, solemn Bible in his hands. Ethan looked at Laura with focused eyes, his gaze overflowing with tenderness.
Yes, I do.
Bride, do you take this man to be your husband, to live together in marriage, to love him, comfort him, honor and keep him, in sickness and in health, in sorrow and in joy, so long as you both shall live?
Yes, I do.
By the authority vested in me by the Holy Spirit, the Father, and the Son, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may now kiss the bride.
The priest closed the Bible and smiled at the newlyweds reuniting. Laura suddenly felt a lump in her throat, her eyes becoming moist. She touched her still barely noticeable belly, feeling a sense of belonging in her once wandering heart. At the end of the long day, as I stand before you, you will see my scars, knowing I was once hurt and have healed. Let the past be the past. Thinking about the future, where we can continue living together, those edges smoothed by hardship will eventually radiate warmth and joy.
Laura wiped her moist eyes and was about to look up when a familiar diamond ring appeared before her. Ethan's slender, beautiful fingers gently approached, slipping the ring, which Laura thought she had sold and lost forever, back onto her ring finger, his movements tender.
How did you get it back?
She looked at the regained ring with delight, as happy as a child. Ethan didn't answer, just smiled lightly, and the next second, he gently lifted Laura's chin and pressed his warm lips to hers. Everything was conveyed without words. Aaron and Henry, sitting back in their seats, watched the heartwarming scene and exchanged smiles.
My brother's already on his second marriage. Dad, when are you going to find yourself a wife?
As everyone was immersed in the joy brought by this convoluted and passionate love story, the wedding march playing through the speakers suddenly stopped.
Is there a technical issue?
He was about to call someone to check it when the music started again. However, the wedding march had turned into a bizarre cello concerto.
Laura, what's happening?
Ethan's face turned ashen, and he quickly looked at Laura, only to find that her expression had turned cold the moment the music started. Her eyes were vacant, like a lifeless doll, and the smile that had been on her face moments ago had vanished.
Ethan, you heartless man.
A fierce light suddenly flashed in her eyes, burning straight at Ethan.
Laura! Wake up! Don't let them control you.
He cried out in anguish, but Laura suddenly pushed him away forcefully. Aaron, anxious and helpless, could only scan the chapel with a vigilant gaze.
Khloe! She must be here.
Sure enough, two shadows emerged from the corner of the chapel the next second. Khloe took off her cap, revealing a haggard face with a venomous expression.
Ha ha ha. Do you think I would lose so easily?
Her eerie laughter echoed in everyone's ears, each note like a thunderclap.
Khloe, you'll pay for this.
Khloe suddenly pulled out a knife from behind and threw it towards Laura from a distance.
Ethan, do you think you can walk out of here alive today?
Ethan's heart sank. The next moment, he saw Laura quickly pick up the knife from the ground. The blade emitted a strange black glow, clearly poisoned.
No!
At the last moment, just as the knife in Laura's hand was about to pierce Ethan's chest, she suddenly stopped. The knife's handle hit the ground heavily.
How could it fail?
Jack, standing behind, shouted in shock, but his face turned pale when he saw Ethan's meaningful expression. The next second, a dozen bodyguards rushed in from all sides of the chapel, capturing Khloe and Jack in one fell swoop.
Did you think you were the only one with a backup plan?
He had already found someone to break the hypnotic control over Laura. This was all just a final act for them to watch.
Enjoy the rest of your life in prison.
The crowd watched coldly as the two villains finally met their deserved end and cheered. Only now did the dust truly settle.
Do you remember when you asked if one day you stabbed me in the heart and then said sorry, would I smile and say it's okay?
Yes.
I would say, it's okay, I love you.